All right, everybody. Today, going to talk about U.S.-China trade war, the continuing economic war between the United States and China, the Middle Kingdom. Going to talk about the swine flu epidemic over there, swine fever in pigs, not in people, how it could affect the tariff, the trade war. Does it give Trump leverage? Listen and find out. So let's talk about the current trade war with China. Let's talk a little bit more. So there is a fantastic investor, hedge fund guy named Kyle Bass or Kyle Bass. I think it's Kyle Bass. He's on Twitter, but he is he's a financial guy. He's got his shit together. He made a lot of money off the 2008 housing crisis and is heavily involved in Asia, which I didn't know about. I started following him recently. He's very outspoken against the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, rightfully so. And he is one thing I've been reading about. If you haven't been paying attention, there has been a swine flu, an African swine flu epidemic in China that it's only affecting, to everyone's knowledge, pork production. So apparently pork production is getting destroyed in China. Like they are just losing tons of pigs, and it's actually been happening all over the place. So this is a big deal. Let's go ahead, read some of this article, then I'll talk about some of the implications and things like that. So it's the title of this from the Daily Caller, written by Kyle Bass himself and another guy named Daniel Babich. It's titled, "The Massive Pig Ebola Epidemic Will Give Trump Big Leverage in His Trade Standoff with China, with the Middle Kingdom." Here we go. It says, the threat to food availability and security from Chinese pig Ebola, that's what they're calling the swine flu, these African swine flu for pigs, the swine flu for pigs, and fall armyworm will prevent China from aggressively using tariffs as an offensive weapon against the U.S. over the coming year. Just as the poor structure of China's leveraged economy necessitates they return to the negotiating table with the U.S., the largest buyer of its goods, food insecurity in China will oblige them to put aside their main retaliatory tool and start earnestly negotiating with the United States. So it's pretty clear what we're looking into is that we're looking at the main area here is tariffs. And how China is going to be able, if they're going to be able to retaliate against U.S. tariffs with the impending food shortage. So here we go. He talks a lot about some financial stuff here and how basically in response to the imposition of U.S. tariffs, China retaliated by imposing tariffs on 99% of all U.S. agricultural exports. So these were devised to hurt senators who represent agricultural states ahead of the 2020 election. He says that currently U.S. pork exports to China are subject to a 62% tariff, and soybeans are subject to a 27% tariff, while chicken exports are outright banned. U.S. farmers are hoping these tariffs will be lifted imminently as part of an eventual trade deal. So in response to our tariffs on a lot of Chinese goods, the Chinese have been hitting back on our farmers. As stated in the article, they've been hitting soybean exports, they've been hitting pork exports, they've been hitting chicken exports. And the idea here, according to Kyle Bass, his opinion, is they're doing it to hurt senators. Because the senators, if they feel squeezed, they'll put pressure on the Trump administration, or maybe they'll have to feel like they could go around the Trump administration to end this trade war. Now it talks about how there's so Chinese pig Ebola is a severe and highly virulent disease, nearly always fatal to hogs, but purportedly harmless to humans. It goes on to talk about how quickly it spreads. This particular outbreak of African swine fever has proven to be the deadliest in world history. It's historic. There's never been anything like it, says Christine McCracken, a senior animal protein analyst for the global lender Rabobank. She says it's a frightening situation only in that there is no current control. So they have no idea how to stop it. And it has spread to countries such as Mongolia, Vietnam, Cambodia, North Korea, and South Korea, and it says parts of Europe as well. McCracken estimates, and now this is estimation, that 200 million pigs, or roughly half of China's pig population and 25% of the global pig population or more, will die this year. That will be, I mean, everybody knows, if you know anything about supply and demand, that will be a huge hit on the price of pork. And pork is highly consumed in China. China is both the world's largest producer and consumer of pork, at around 50% of the world's supply and 20% of the world's animal protein supply. So that's animal protein could be like cows, lamb, whatever people are eating for protein. The global cross-border trade in pork, total exports only, constitutes 15% of Chinese demand. If the worst-case scenario comes true and nearly the entire Chinese hog herd is affected, then China will need to import massive amounts of U.S. pork regardless of the state of U.S.-China talks. To make matters worse, the fall armyworm. So this is another issue. Something called the fall armyworm. It's a caterpillar which damages crops, including corn, soybeans, rice, and sugarcane, has spread into China from Myanmar and is now running rampant in 15 southern Chinese provinces. So the USDA estimates that by fall of 2019, it will be spreading into North China. They estimate 20% crop losses, or previous infestations have resulted in corn yields, in a reduction in corn yields by 20%. In Africa, it's been up to 70% from the armyworm. China is the world's second largest corn producer after the U.S. and is facing an unprecedented threat. So China is facing imminent protein and food shortages. The price of pork and other proteins in China will skyrocket this year. So, I'm going to end the article there. Hold on for some ads, and then I will talk about some implications here. Hey, everybody. Do you want to record your own podcast like me? Well, Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now, Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. That means you get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now by reading this ad. That's right, mofos. It's easy. Check it out. Okay, so the implications are obvious, right? Basically, with a massive food shortage in China, not only will the price increase, but there's going to be, in order to meet the demand, they're going to have to import from the United States. And that's where the title of this article comes into play, right? That's where we get the main idea, the premise of this. The massive pig Ebola epidemic will give Trump leverage. So the idea is that China is just basically running against time. How long can they play this tariff game? How long can they play the trade war game and have their own demands before they have to start capitulating to what the United States asks of them, what we ask of them? So some of the big issues we have on the table are, China does manipulate the currency. They have a two-currency system. It's a little complex for me to understand, but it's definitely, they don't have a floating exchange rate within the country, and it does affect trade imbalances. Here's the other thing, is we have an issue with China stealing IP. And I'm sure there's other stuff going on. Right? There's probably a lot of espionage, a lot of a lot of hacking and things going on. And what this does is we're basically leveraging, finally there is a president that understands where our strength is and is leveraging that strength to get some negotiations done. So the leverage here is that, one, there's two things. One, we're hurting China, or the tariffs, the trade war hurts China. One, because if we stop buying their goods, then, they have a large trade imbalance with us. They sell us a lot more than we sell them in terms of products. It will heavily impact their manufacturing sector. Manufacturing employs a lot of people in China. That's a big hit. You also got to remember, with 1.3 billion people, they can't afford to have a large decrease a large increase in joblessness, right? Because that could lead to economic, political instability. That could lead to the overthrow of the Communist Party. They don't want that. So our tariffs are already affecting them that way. Now, in order to respond, China put the agricultural tariffs on us. Here's the problem. Because they're dealing with armyworm and pig Ebola, some major sources of food are going to be heavily affected, right? Their pork stock is going to be heavily affected. So they're most likely going to see a large increase in the price of pork. They could also see a large increase in the price of grains, corn, things like that. So they'll be, maybe soy as well. So they'll be forced to, if they want to meet their demand, buy from the United States. With that being said, that means that they're going to have to cut back on the tariffs. Basically, they're going to have to eliminate, is what it looks like. I don't know for sure. The idea is that they'll have to eliminate the tariffs on our exports going to them agriculturally, but we could maintain our tariffs on them. So we could, that's a big hit. As well as while we're blacklisting Huawei, that's another big hit. So, that's still an ongoing situation. And this is, if I had to make a prediction, I've been reading a lot of headlines that it looks like President Xi or Chairman Xi of China and President Trump are going to sit down and probably try to work something out. Based on what I'm reading, if this is true, if things are going to be as difficult like this, I do think that the Chinese leadership will come to the table and come to an agreement. I still think their strategy over the long term is just to wait out Trump, right? Wait out Trump and then wait till we get a retarded or semi-literate person in the White House, or somebody who just has no backbone or skin, somebody who has no backbone. Wait till they get into office. Once they get into office, then I think that's when China goes back to their ways. But I do think we might see some cooperation from China, assuming Trump gets elected for the next 5 years. I do think they'll probably come to the table with all these pressures weighing down on them. Because remember, China has to have stability. That's a very big deal for the Chinese leadership. With 1.3, it's hard for us to imagine. Their cities are much more packed than ours. Things could get out of control quickly in China. That's why surveillance is so heavy there. So they don't want that to happen. They want stability. They want growth. So they will most likely come to the table and work something out with Trump. You don't know for sure. And one thing I want to touch on is, some people get worried about a military standoff with China. It's very possible. I have a couple of ideas. This one's not my idea fully. Somebody mentioned that China will have a difficult time being committed to any military conflict because of the one-child policy. I didn't even realize this. I wish I knew the guy who said it. I can't even find the comment now, but another guy on Twitter mentioned it, and it's really insightful. Because of China's one-child policy, they are probably not going to be willing to sustain a large number of casualties. Even though they have a gigantic military, if you have one son and he's in the military and he dies, that's a tragedy. First off, it's a tragedy for any family regardless. But when you have one child and you're aging parents and that child was going to take care of you, you're fucked, right? Now, all of a sudden, because that's a big deal in China. If you don't know, the United States and China have grown very differently. In the United States, it's very, it's kind of understood that, yeah, you'll take care of your parents, but your parents are kind of expected to have some savings, have some retirement. That's like kind of expected, right? That your parents will be able to take care of themselves financially for a good part of their old age. As well as in the United States, we have bigger families, multiple siblings, more people can chip in and help. In China, it's not like that. Because of the decades of the one-child policy and because of the drastic rise in living costs and standards, people are really only able to afford one kid, but we're only allowed to have one kid in many circumstances. So if that one kid dies, right, a lot of people that kid was going to have to support them in their old age. And if that kid got married, then that's an even bigger deal because then the husband and wife were supposed to support both pairs of parents. And hopefully they don't have a kid, because then that's another, I mean, that's an absolute travesty as well, right? Then you've got a kid, a wife, two sets of grandparents to take care of. That's just impossible. So a lot of people in China, a lot of young people that have kids are dealing with that. You have maybe a couple, they're 30, 35, 40 years old. They've got a kid, he's growing up, but they're taking care of their parents, they're taking care of themselves, they're taking care of their children. So that dynamic is very prevalent in China. Children are expected to take care of their parents. And with China's economic uncertainty for the last century, that's just the name of the game. So, I do think it is smart that we push them. I do think China will continue to show aggressive sides militarily, to maybe see what they can poke around with. But I don't think the risk of a war is as high as we think. However, just because I don't want to make any prediction, it could happen, right? People can fuck up and make mistakes, and there you go. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Peace.